should.
One chair.
Yeah, just go fishing together.
Yeah, I think.
Put the rest up here.
We're live. Okay. This is,
Take a breath.
yeah, right. This is in the Natural Resources and Energy, and it is Thursday, April 23rd. Wow, really? This is 23rd, okay. And we are starting this morning with a discussion on data centers, H727, and the plan is to just go right down the list. And so we're gonna start with Mr. Favor from the Public Utility Commission. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Sure. Did you say favor?
I did say
Yeah,
favor.
That's right.
Good
Morning, Madam Chair,
morning.
members of the committee, I'm Greg Favor with the PUC. So I'm here to talk about section 5 of 727.
Yes, we can do things.
Full.
Data centers, is that the
Yes,
one?
there's a
Yes, yes,
section 5.
section 5.
Yes, or anything else you'd like to comment on, but section 5 particularly, I think.
We're basically fine with the bill. Section 5, we worked with the House Committee on Language, so we're fine with this, with doing this report on regional renewable energy. Happy to answer any questions. It's a pretty short section, so.
Yeah, and the rest of it, you're all also okay with, as mentioned.
Right, and I mean. Basically, a data center would come in under a special contract similar to that. That we use for ski resorts today. This has some extra language in it, but it's all fine.
Mhm. One of the, if I can ask about section 6, which I realized was not part that I was on specific. It's the decommissioning.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the asks that we had from utility yesterday was as a part of the recommendations for decommissioning, that there be clear lines of authority between who is doing what between ANR, the PUC, and the Land Use Review Board. And I don't know if you have any reactions or thoughts about potentially the need for there to be clear lines of authority. Like, should that be called out?
Well. This is developed by the Department of Public Service. In consultation with ANR and the LERB. Doesn't really even include us.
Okay.
So a data center, that's gonna be in a warehouse or a building. We don't deal with warehouses or buildings. If there's an interconnection, there's a substation or something that needed to be decommissioned, but typically that wouldn't happen because that substation will be owned by a utility. We wouldn't be decommissioning on that, so probably wouldn't be involved in this.
Okay, but that's great to know.
So
I've written it in my notes as
Yeah, I got to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should there be clear lines between those three players? Yeah,
Between DPS.
sure.
Yeah, they had said
Yeah.
PUC, so that's why everything lines up the same way, so. People get you guys mixed up all the time, I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah, we finished our name to try to avoid that, but
Yeah, it doesn't work, even the utilities, because this came from a utility, they mixed.
maybe originally up in the house, they had us doing all the decommissioning. We explained to them that, hey, this is a building, this is more of an A&R thing,
Sure,
and they changed it.
so that might have been like just a leftover from the
Maybe some
house.
sort of artifact.
Sure, that's certainly possible. Okay. Great, any other questions, for Mr. Freeman?
Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much. Okay, now do we have Mr. Groveman?
I don't see him there, but
Well,
there it is.
Morning,
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Good morning.
So John is running a little late. I think he probably thought that Greg's testimony would be a little longer. But we are going to tag team anyway, so I can get started. We're going to talk about sections 3 and section 4, which is the water consumption, water usage part.
Yeah.
I can start and then he can hopefully join me. He's more of the, he's got more of the PFAS
Great.
parts of it, and obviously knows that 250 better than I do. But no, I can Just get us started.
Sure.
So, good morning, for the record, Chair Carpenter, Lakeshore Planning Committee. I was probably 6 or 7 weeks ago that some folks from House Energy Committee approached John and I that they were working on this bill and did we have some suggestions on the water consumption, water conservation sections, because they were putting together this bill that, unlike the moratorium that wound up in finance, I believe Senator White's bill, and this was more conditions. And I, at the time, I didn't know much about data centers, other than what I read in the papers, such as, the Times and what have you. And I still don't know a whole lot about them because it seems to be a moving target. Which is some of the concerns, is that it's a new technology, there's different sizes and everything along those lines. So I will muddle through a little bit of background, but then I'm largely going to refer to portions of the bill. We do have some changes, proposed changes for that. We have been going, John and I have been going back and forth with DEC a little bit on some of the language. In some areas, we are agreeing to disagree, and in some areas we are still chatting. I know you have them coming in tomorrow morning, I believe. One of the areas that we have a disagreement is they would like to fold most of this into Act 250 and have this be an Act 250 review, where our argument is that the district commission is not necessarily this should be A&R's expertise. A data center is a completely unique construct. This isn't a subdivision or I want to put an addition onto my hotel. And this is something that's potentially, hey John, this is something that's potentially the size of 2 football fields, a small one, and an open loop circuit cooling system uses potentially 300,000 gallons of water a day, and that's small. So concerns that the A&R should be involved in this in the permitting, and that is what's reflected in a lot of section 4. Oh yeah,
Sorry.
I'm just getting started.
I didn't know yet how far we got.
Literally.
No, keep it slow.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So,
So just to give a little background, and I think in terms of water consumption and water usage, the big thing to think about is the cooling system. And in learning about some of this, there's an open loop system and a closed loop system, and then some subcategories of closed loop. Now, an open loop system for 20 megawatts, which is the trigger level in this bill, it uses about they say about 110 million gallons of water a year. So you do that down, it's a little bit more than 300,000 gallons of water a day. And in an open loop system, you lose 80% of the water to evaporation. So you're constantly pulling water out of whatever water body you're using. And that's one of the reasons Lakeshore Planning Committee is involved, just because the site that people talk about a lot is Vernon on the lower Connecticut, the old Yankee site. But also with that much water, you're not going to put it on the Winooski River here. You're going to have to put it on Lake Champlain, Lake Nymphomagog, or some other big body of water. So obviously Lakeshore Planning Committee has concerns that one of these wind up on the lake. A closed loop system is just that. It captures the evaporation to use less water. But my understanding from what I read, it uses 50 to 70% less water than an open loop. So 30% of 300,000 is still 90,000 gallons of water a day. So it still uses a fair amount of water. So what John and I have gone through in the suggestions is,
okay, can I interrupt you?
please.
I think I missed something there.
Oh.
Because you're talking about a closed loop system, you're saying it still is going to cycle through some amount of water. How does that, if it's closed loop, how does that?
It's evaporation, that you lose water.
Okay,
It's not, even if you're recycling it, you're gonna lose some water. And you have
Especially-
to replace the water.
Right.
Yeah, but much less than if you're just
Much less.
pulling it and just,
Yeah.
Mhm.
discharging it.
I just, let's make sure we get somebody from the industry that actually understands.
Other than that, yes. So in our recommendations, if you go to, I don't know if folks have the bill in front of them. Do I? Have the bill in front of them? In section So in section 3, and this is what I mentioned about a little bit, if you go to the bottom of page 6, top of page 7. There's, I'm looking at the as passed by the House.
It's a draft 1.5, that's what I have.
And so I have,
The House passed the introduced or did they?
No, they changed. So hang on, let me. Fortunately, everything.
We have one,
I believe 1.5 is as lined up the same as passed the House, and that is the as passed the House.
right, because we ended up taking it up for,
Which your committee hasn't made any changes to it yet.
right,
Okay, no, so well, let me look at 1.5 then, I'm like the top of page 7, lines 1 through 8. Where it starts with section 310 BSA 61.
1.5, okay.
So. By definition, defining a data center as using over 20 megawatts of power, so this is adding the trigger into Act 250. So we get Act 250 to review, but if you look at the subsequent section, section 4, we're asking for A&R to do other permitting.
in addition to.
In addition to the Act 250 review, and that's where we have a disagreement with the Agency of Natural Resources. They would like to have a complete Act 250 review. We believe that there is reason for the Agency of Natural Resources to do their permitting and their own reviews outside of Act 250, arguing the District Commission doesn't have the expertise that A&R does. John, can we elaborate on that?
So this is it's a bit confusing, and we haven't talked with A&R, so we haven't tried to. I think you've narrowed the disagreement. But so basically, and a lot of what informs our thinking on this is Vermont Yankee. Because like a big power plant, in Vermont Yankee, one of the big issues was they needed water for cooling. And it was obviously a significant industrial process that resulted in generating nuclear power. And so there was with Vermont Yankee, and there will be with any data center, a Clean Water Act discharge. That will occur. And that discharge permit will have to meet the water quality standards. And the big issues with the data center, like with Vermont Yankee, is hot water. Hot water temperature is a pollutant under the Clean Water Act and our water quality standards. So discharging hot water and cold water fisheries, which is what we have in Vermont, has a significant effect on fisheries habitat and aquatic habitat. In Vermont Yankee, you saw it's called the thermal plume. The real debate was like, how large is the thermal plume? How far does it go down? We didn't really know. We always quibbled about that argued about it with Vermont Yankee. But since it shut down, we've seen the plume went very far because we've seen the fish come back. You saw, we've seen what the impacts were and shad was the real big impact of Vermont Yankee. So that discharge permit will be in place for data centers, and thermal pollution will be a big issue. But also, there are other pollutants in the discharge. The one that we focus on, that's been a focus across the country, is PFAS, because PFAS is used in the cooling system, because PFAS, its qualities to be, resistant, be good for water resistant, like Teflon pans, and very strong, and it stands up to heat very well. So it's been used. So those will be the main issues in the discharge permit. But the discharge permit doesn't cover all the water quality issues for a major industrial activity like this. And with Vermont Yankee, when I was with A&R during the Shulman administration, we came in and argued that they should also get a Clean Water Act water quality certificate, which attaches when there are certain federal licenses or permits. So classically, it's like a FERC, like for hydroelectric facilities, like a FERC license. It's an Army Corps of Engineers permit for dredging and filling. You need to get a state water quality certificate. And Yankee did get a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and so that would trigger the 401, but we had a bunch of legal wrangling with them about whether they should get it or not. And our analysis at A&R was that, and one of my Yankees arguments was like, you don't need the water quality certificate, you have the discharge permit, like we'll deal with the thermal pollution, we'll deal with other pollutants. And what the science has said at A&R and what, the research shows is that you can deal with broader issues like erosion, like other pollutants that are coming off the site. Such an industrial activity, I got a broader water quality review and broader issues, and Jared can talk more about the studies that that are typically required with the water quality certificates. So the House bill reflects, data centers probably won't trigger a water quality certificate because they don't need a federal permit or license. They may in some instances because they actually may, and Ben Walsh will talk about this, they require so much energy, they actually may generate energy because they'll have to have their own kind of source of power. And they could end up being an energy generator, which then would require them to get a federal license, which would trigger water quality certificate. We don't know that's gonna be the case, and we just don't, and you can have industry in and talk about it, but we, you know, I think we just won't know until we see an application. So we wanted to have the requirements of a water quality certificate, even if one wasn't required, and that's reflected in the House bill.
Yeah.
A&R has said, we really don't like that, you know, we don't wanna have to go and issue like a new permit, you know, you've heard from A&R a lot about their resources being constrained and all of that, and that's legitimate, we recognize that. So in our discussions with A&R, they said, well, is there a way to identify the aspects of that water quality certificate review and just kind of pull them out? And then we could either attach them to another permit, which is what where we thought we were with A&R, or A&R would address them in Act 250. So they seemed willing, right, Jared? They seemed willing to. They seem to agree that it would be good to have those requirements pulled out because they go beyond the discharge permit. And we don't know whether that this Clean Water Act certificate will be required or not. But since going back and forth with them last night, they seem to, A&R's preference is that those issues get addressed in Act 250. Rather, our idea was I think to attach them to A&R is developing a water withdrawal permit, a surface water withdrawal permit. So we said, well, why don't we, and it doesn't exist yet, right? It's under development. We think it'll be outlands.
So you recall the surface water discussion was in 2022. There was 2 years of collecting data, and then there'll be we're going into pre-rulemaking, I believe in July, to develop a surface water withdrawal permit. So it should be available in public by early 2027. And I can walk you all through some of the aspects that we've asked for to be included in the bill, and that's part of it.
And just for the committee's sake, we had also invited A&R for today, but they couldn't come today, they're still gonna be tomorrow.
Yeah, it was good. You'll hear from them tomorrow. We went back and forth with them.
And we'll be going back.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
But so the issue really is, so I don't know exactly, so where we thought we were with A&R was like, don't require a whole different permit. Pull out the requirements and Jared could go through those.
Yep.
And then the last issue was whether they get attached to a permit like the surface water withdrawal permit, or they just go to Act 250. My argument, and you know, this is just a policy issue, you guys even have to make the decision, and it's pretty technical issues, but my argument for having A&R attach it to another permit is that they're in control, like Act 250, as much as you've heard me stolen versions of Act 250, and they're less activities less equipped to deal with highly technical issues. These are highly technical issues of, you know, a water quality permitting and regulation of a really complicated facility. And basically, if you leave it to Act 250, like don't rely on A&R, right? If A&R doesn't come in and say, okay, here are the issues, we have to somehow kind of bootstrap the requirements that Jared will go over with you to say Act 250 must look at those issues, because right now, Act 250 for water is called, it's criterion 1 through 4, basically, it's undue water pollution. So there's no specificity in that really, and you have to get A&R permits certainly. But this wouldn't be an A&R permit, it would just be issued that A&R looks at. So A&R would, you'd have to somehow have a requirement that Act 250 look at those issues, and then Act 250 would sit, as they always do, with the district commission in judgment, right? It'd be like, okay, give us the evidence, and then the applicant can put on its evidence. You know, environmental groups to get involved, you know, citizens, whoever's concerned. And we're like, rather than leave it to that, it seemed better to have A&R just deal with these technical issues in a permit, make that permit a rebuttable presumption permit in Act 250, that way it just goes in. And Act 250, the district, you're not asking these lay district commissioners basically to try to hear the evidence and make the decision. A&R's argument will be something like, we just would rather not even attach something to another permit because of resource constraints, we'd rather just go to Act 250. We're concerned that they, whether they will or not will depend on who's in control of A&R or the governor, will they go in? They have to go in. Otherwise, environmental groups could go in and then A&R will get pulled in. So anyway, that's the argument.
So we have a few.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys are confusing me.
No, yeah.
Um,
And I'm trying to figure out how to break this down.
What I'm hearing you say, I think, is that you think that the water quality and water use issues, broadly speaking, should be handled through A&R permits, not through Act 250 permits with the district.
Yes,
commission.
yes,
Yes, okay.
yeah.
That's what I thought, but then I'm looking at the bill and that's what it seems like it does.
Correct.
So,
Well, that's the way that the A&R was gonna argue change.
I like,
A&R was gonna argue
Okay.
change, right?
so, okay,
Yeah.
so you're pre-argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so, trying to make-
We're
I was like, well, wait, that's what.
Yeah, so the way the bill works,
said.
but the bill does though, when we agree with A&R, like, so what the way the bill does that is it basically says, even if this water quality certificate is not required, you're gonna issue a state equivalent of that, and A&R didn't like that part of it. So that's where we said, well, we bootstrap some of the requirements, be specific about it, and bootstrap it to another permit, a different permit.
I see,
And then
okay.
A&R came back
That's
and said,
confusing.
just leave it
I
at,
heard
Yeah.
A&R first, and
Yeah.
have them argue, we
Yeah.
can do it this way, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
I would.
I just totally cuts to the chase, because if we just came in and.
Have people, I are asking
Yeah.
for it in the.
Yeah, so the way the bill is, yeah, right.
Maybe tomorrow.
We were successful in the house, and they tried to.
So let me,
You know,
so let me walk you through sort of the thoughts that are on page 9, that Senator you've been highlighting. So starting off page 9, section E1, which is line 12 through 16. Data center shall obtain all applicable water quality and water resource protection permits. That sort of goes without saying. They would need a stream alteration permit or a stormwater permits and sort of all of those different permits, wetlands potentially. But the House Energy Committee really wanted it to be there in writing so people can actually see it, it's not implied, it's explicit. Then if you sort of move up the page, up to line 1, if the data center proposes to use groundwater, they of course have to obtain a groundwater permit. But the bill says, and we of course support, the threshold for getting a groundwater permit is 57,600 gallons of groundwater a day. Our argument is that there should be no threshold. If they're withdrawing any amount of groundwater for whatever purpose, there should be a groundwater permit. Same with the next section, the surface water permit. When it's available, if there's a withdrawal of surface water, they'll have to get a surface water permit. However, if you look at the last line, it says the rules adopted by the secretary shall require a data center to cease withdrawals under drought conditions.
Wait, I'm sorry, where,
I'm going fast.
Yeah, where-
On lines 9 through 11 on
Gotcha.
page 9.
okay, sorry.
No,
Say that again.
Well, the thought being is that they'll have to get, if they're gonna withdraw surface water, they will have to get a surface water withdrawal permit. But under drought conditions, they would have to cease withdrawals. I mean, I think that's something that should be under not just data centers, but any large user of water, and I think that's gonna, play out through the, through the rulemaking process for the permit of how that's gonna work. Because obviously you are in surface water and groundwater withdrawals, you're necessarily competing with other local users, which could be, especially in the case of groundwater, it could be an aquifer that other people are using for drinking water. They could be competing on surface water uses with local agriculture or other people who are, recreation, of course, aquatic biota. So all that should be taken into account. And I think it will at any rate, as the permitting process, the rulemaking process goes forward. We just wanted to call it out specifically. Some of these things are in here specifically. Like I said, it would be implied, but I think it's important that people see it. So then there's those extra levels of protection.
So just to be, sorry, go ahead.
That proposed language at this point.
Well, we have language here. I do have a few changes that are here that I'll hand out as well.
But the basic is you support the way the bill came to us from the House, you don't.
Correct, with
to
a
change.
with a few changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
One change.
Which is better to start with that.
Sorry.
My apologies. It's been a week.
Yeah. Or-
In a few months.
So one change that we're proposing on page 8. Section B2, starting on line 13 through 17 is initially the way it had been suggested, if water is used to cool a data center, the data center shall use a closed loop cooling system to minimize impacts to the water quality, quantity, surface and groundwater, unless a district commission determines the use of a closed loop is not feasible. Well, we thought about that a little bit more, and I think our suggestion now in language is that that sentence ends at impacts to water quality and quantities is surface and groundwater, period. No unless. So just,
No.
we are requiring closed loop
Yeah,
system.
why not just require it?
Yeah,
And it just didn't come up in the house.
yeah, no, it was. We were on a bit at the end of the process, and it was a little, now that we had to choose to think it through a little bit more. It makes sense to cut it off, on line 15 after the word groundwater before the middle of this. And we have that suggestion here, in alternatives. And there's 2 other suggestions. I don't know, you probably want to save the PFAS for last. And I can talk about these studies now.
You want to talk about the studies, and then I'll keep us looking fast.
So let me hand this on this. We could grab this one. The green one for Jude as well. Did I send this to you, Jude? I'm not sure if I did. Okay, I will send it to you. I apologize. So for those watching home, I apologize. There isn't a version posted quite yet. If you go to the back for water quality certificate. So what John was talking about, rather than specifically calling out a water quality certificate, would be required. And this is on draft 1.5. It is, lines 17 to 21 on page 9 is, so those line numbers aren't correct. I'll change them before I submit to June. Rather than calling out for a water quality certificate specifically, we are calling out for the assessment to assess the impacts on water quality. And as John said, these studies often for a water quality certificate include impacts on water quality, aquatic biota, state endangered and threatened species, instant flow habitat, impingement, i.e. sucking fish against the grate as you're throwing the water in. Stream bank erosion, littoral habitat, so stream bank habitat and wetlands. You would not necessarily require studies on all of this. It would be sort of if it was drawing in more than 300,000 gallons of water a day, you'd have to do these additional studies to study the impacts that are going to have on the water body that are outside or in addition to what you would normally do under a groundwater, stream water, or lucas permits. If I'm saying one correctly.
Right, so these are the studies, this is where hopefully my rounding at the beginning will be helpful in that. So this is what we pulled out of what what we thought were relevant from the water quality certificate. And rather than the House bill, which basically required an A&R to issue like a kind of a state equivalent new permit. We pull them out and say that these are the things that need to be considered. And I don't think what does it here, but what we talked with A&R about is like that bootstrapping them to the permit they're creating, so it wouldn't be a whole new permit. And then the last sentence is, it should be a rebuttable presumption, all these should be rebuttable presumption permits in Act 250. The House was really, one of its kind of North Stars was that they wanted to make sure that any data center went through Act 250, so that's part of the bill, that a data center and as defined triggered Act 250. Regardless of any of the other jurisdictional triggers, I can't imagine that it wouldn't trigger Act 250, that it wouldn't be on more than 10 acres. Which would be, even a town zoning subdivision the trigger, but it's gonna go through Act 250. A&R issues the permits but they can be used in Act 250 as rebuttable presumptions. Along with all the other permits, that would be required for something like this. So that's what the last sentence is.
Give me wait.
Of the last paragraph on.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, sorry.
Yeah,
The rebuttable presumption.
I think what we're talking about makes sense, because I think
asking the district commission to do this kind of from scratch and trying to pull everybody together and where the rebuttal consumption permit will be more efficient. And quickly and will actually give something for the commission to work with.
I think it's a lot.
Testimony again, so.
I think it's a lot for a district judge to look at by themselves. I mean, obviously they use A&R expertise, but
And they're not gonna do it without A&R anyway.
Right.
So I think I think it makes sense.
But that's legal here, so that'll be like somebody who'll have to decide, that'll be. One of the issues, aren't that many issues of disagreement really, and then the last thing, talk about PFAS now.
yeah,
So the last issue, on water,
Before
yeah,
we keep
sure.
going, I have questions. So in this proposed new lay alternative for the water quality certificate, I guess I don't know what littoral habitat.
It's the habitat around a lake or.
shoreline,
Yeah,
sorry.
Shoreline habitat.
Yeah, where you see it is often in drawdown reservoirs under hydropower, and then if you draw down a reservoir in the winter time. When all the little salamanders and critters have buried themselves into the mud, you freeze all the little critters. So that's where our habitat comes in terms of water control.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I think. So. I think I'm good to keep going, okay. Thank you, sorry, you were moving on to.
so then the last issue that we wanted to talk about. On water is the PFAS issue, so we support, I mean, we think that the PFAS provisions in the House passed rid of the bill. Are good, they, where this was, the committee working with Mike O'Grady, so, you know, you should hear from Mike, you will hear from Mike on this, and. After a back and forth, landed on prohibiting the discharge of PFAS. Because we don't have, and I think the committee's heard this, as part of other discussions, so we don't have a surface water quality standard for PFAS. Even though we're legally, ANR is legally required to adopt one, and they've been legally required to adopt one for several years, but they haven't done it. So this is where the chickens begin to come home to roost, when you get a facility like this that everyone's concerned about the discharge and the PFAS and the discharge, because as I said, it's, you know, it's been well established that PFAS is used in these cooling systems, there will be use of PFAS and a discharge. We don't have a standard, so if we had a standard, it would just go with the discharge permit, and the standard would be X, and they would have to, the data center have to treat to make sure that standard X was met. We don't have that, so the discharge permit won't cover PFAS, because there's no standard for them, there's no requirement in the water quality standards for them to do so. So Mike's idea, I think, was to just prohibit it, just because we don't have the standard, we're gonna be very strict. So so the data center would have to basically disclose what PFAS was being used, and then they would have to treat, they would have to come up with treatment, and it would be zero. Basically, the standard would be zero, because it's a prohibition, right? You know, there are really intense treatment standards, usually it's like something called reverse osmosis, so it is expensive, data centers certainly have a lot of money, so they could do it. So that's one issue, so we do support that, I don't know why we hear from A&R on that, but I just wanted to flag that. Then the issue is, you know, we suggested that there be monitoring, because you could say prohibit the discharge of PFAS, but you want to know what's actually happening, right? Because you won't, you know, just to say it and they install some treatment, how effective is it? So there's a monitoring provision, and that got some discussion in the House. We support the monitoring provision that's in the bill, but you know, you may hear from others that, you know, it's expensive to monitor, and I don't know what year exactly, but I wanted to flag that. But we do support the House. What we do suggest changing in the House bill, and we did talk about this, is the definition of PFAS. So if you're prohibiting the discharge of PFAS and you're monitoring for PFAS, it begs the question, well, what is PFAS? And the way the House bill defines PFAS is the TSCA definition, which is like 40 to 50 PFAS compounds. And as you've heard in this committee and other contexts, there are thousands, tens of thousands of PFAS compounds out there. And this is where you hear calls to regulate the class of PFAS rather than just individual PFAS compounds or like a group of PFAS compounds. So having had a chance to think about it and talk with A&R about it and other people, there's a definition that we have in our statute for PFAS that is essentially the whole class. And so we suggest this is on the first page of our handout, where it suggests a proposed alternative to what's on the House passed bill, page 7 for the definition of PFAS, to use the definition of PFAS, which is in our statutes, 9 VSA 2494 E16. That's a statute related to PFAS and products. And that is closer to the whole class of PFAS, basically. So it's a broader group of PFAS. So we do have that definition for products, and so we're suggesting using it here. So we want to flag that. You'll hear about that from A&R. You'll probably hear from Mike about it, and we could come back and have a discussion about it. It'll be a decision point, I think for the committee. And lastly, this didn't.
Before we go on, there's.
Yeah.
So PFAS obviously helps to transfer heat within the whole system. Is there some other chemical that could be used?
It's a great question. I just don't know. This is where I do think it'd be good to hear from the industry. Like everything I know about this, that I've done through research, and I just know that PFAS is basically it's what's being used because it's available and it's very effective, but it also has a pollution problem. So this doesn't say that you can't use it. It just means you have to, spend the money to treat. So
your idea of like a reverse osmosis would be to just keep reusing that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And try to squeeze it out, right? Squeeze out the PFAS.
And what do you do?
You just keep it out of the water. You just keep it.
Never.
It's obviously a really, it's the problem that we all know it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the last issue with PFAS is like I don't know if it'll come up or not, but I wanted it was in some of A&R's suggestions. So the way that it's written is that it prohibits the discharge of added PFAS, and that is opposed to intentionally added PFAS that has floated around in the House. And there is a definition of intentionally added in Title IX, the same part of the law that has this broader definition of PFAS. But it's for adding it to products, not to manufacturing operations. So we don't have a definition of intentionally added PFAS to manufacturing. And for our argument is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're intentionally adding it, whatever we decide that means through a manufacturing process, or it's there because of the components of the cooling operation that often are bought by other people who make them. So that begs the question, who intentionally added it? Was it the data center? Was it people who made the component part? So on and so forth. So for our money, it's just like, we just don't want it getting to the water. And for an applicant or an operation like this, they definitely have the needs. It's not a concern about their ability to treat and monitor. Certainly we wrestle with the issues of treatment and monitoring, especially with like public water systems, don't have a lot of money, ratepayers in the paying for. So that's not the situation here. So we want to keep it off.
So one question about that. I mean, if we, move to just closed loop systems entirely, then this, what we're talking about in terms of like.
It does mitigate it a lot, yeah.
Yeah, that will
All
help
these,
a lot.
yeah.
But I'm trying to envision like, so what does that look like? And I guess I'm thinking about, runoff from the parking lot or, just like other ways in which water ends up leaving a facility like this. But
Well, that would be, there's that section that says you need the relevant A&R permits, so like stormwater and water quality.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay,
we
so
there's a fair amount of belt and suspenders.
Yeah,
Okay.
but this A&R has this industrial stormwater form permit. It's pretty weak, honestly. It's a general permit. It's a Clean Water Act permit that we deal with salt, right? Jared is known for salt in the building and across the country. Yeah, he's a salt guy. And so we've looked at that permit a lot with industries that have like salt piles and And that permit is pretty unique. I think that's another area where the water quality certificate development suspenders could be helpful with Yankee. That's one of the ways we looked at that water quality certificate. It's like there's a broader water pollution coming off the site, not the discharge of what's coming out of the pipe, right? You know, Clean Water Act has got a lot of layers to it. The discharge layer is pipe, pollutants, standards for those pollutants, treatment, and you know, what can go into the receiving water. So these broader issues like stormwater, all the nasty stuff, especially on an industrial site. Could be captured in stormwater permitting, but I think also through these bootstrap water quality certificate requirements. And yeah, the closed loop thing is interesting. I think the closed loop thing would mitigate, you know, a lot of this. And when this was written, you know, in the house, it was not a required closed loop. So you should take some testimony on that and see if that changes the equation at all. But it's kind of the unknown, like even if it is a closed loop, like what's the harm in having these backstops, you know?
Well, and especially if we don't go to closed loop only.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thanks
Okay,
for the time and yeah,
yes, absolutely.
If there's evaporation, it can't, that's not consistent with the firm closed loop. How's that?
you're losing some water along the way. I don't
I
know.
think about my home
Yeah.
heating system,
Yeah.
nothing comes out of it. Water circuit, it's been a standard.
Unless it overflow,
Well, yes.
because it gets too hot. I didn't hear what's going on, and we really didn't hear.
Yeah.
In a closed loop cooling system, okay, a lot of times what will happen, I mean, for example, if you go down and visit Bradgate, you'll see this at Bradgate. They bring in some water, it goes through a system, it's returned, and part of that system is the water is exposed to the air, it's, you know, they use it to the air to cool the water. And in that process, you do lose some water. It's
exposed.
it is exposed, and they use that to control the temperature of the water, and I suspect that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how the technology works, but
Yeah.
completely agree, Senator. I just, you know, in researching it, this closed loop uses this much less water than open.
Right, it didn't say there was.
It's
So it doesn't say you put the water in once and you never have to put the water in.
It's a closed loop system in the sense that all of the water that comes in gets used or gets evaporated.
Right.
Doesn't get discharged.
It doesn't get discharged
Yeah.
into the, yeah.
And they have to take additional water. I think.
You do, yeah.
That makes
And Rygate has a permit to pull in some amount of water every day.
Right,
That we have.
right.
Okay.
So we learned a lot about it, as much as we learned about data centers, yeah.
Well, and-
We did this.
Having no. You could go 100% closed loop, but your electric bill's gonna be that much higher.
Well, that's great segue to your next time.
That's starting the air. Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we'll move on to your Eddie Walsh, welcome.
Let's see. I put,
I'm gonna go to the.
All right.
Committee, all right.
I'll give it a second. As I put this right,
Thank you, for the record, Ben Julie Walsh, from Deeper,
Yes.
you should note, we don't believe I have a Zoom link, and I do have slides I'd like to share. And I just want to understand, how much time I have, I could easily get through, content that I have prepared on the sort of context around, data centers and energy and principles about how we're trying to approach this, but getting through the issues other states have been grappling with would be difficult in 12 minutes or so.
Fair enough. What is your time constraints for like later in the morning?
I am flexible all morning. I could also certainly split it and start now and those other points.
Let's do
Later,
that. So things I was thinking about Michael Brady being in here at 10.
Yes.
So thank you for your flexibility. So we'll get through what we get
Sorry,
through.
I would bump Mr. Rivers.
Okay.
So let me start with the principles that we're using as we approach this issue when it comes to climate and energy. And when I say we, obviously, I am representing Deeper specifically. I'm also working very closely with the Vermont Natural Resources Council and Conservation Law Foundation.
And others, so I'm not gonna pretend to represent their views, but I think it's safe to say that there's a consensus in the environmental community around some of the major issues that we're facing and how to approach this. So I actually have the link, so let me just go ahead and share my slides. Out audio. Okay. So I'm gonna start just with a little bit of context background around data centers and how the picture nationally around data centers is evolving and has been evolving in recent years. And then should have time from Mr. Gritty here to get into some of the principles of how we're approaching this. Although there are questions, we'll see. So the first thing that I want to drive home is this idea of, oh, these use a lot of electricity. That is something we've all heard quite a lot. But I don't think most people really have their heads wrapped around what a lot of electricity means when it comes to one of these facilities. So what I have here on the screen is in blue, the blue graphs, the blue bars rather, are various data center sizes. And the two green bars are two examples of usage in Vermont to give you a sense of scale. So the capacity is in megawatts, the usage is in gigawatt hours. Don't worry about the conversion, but I'm happy to talk to anyone after committee about the sources I use and the methodology, but these are very solid estimates. So all the way over on the left, you have a 20 megawatt data center, which is what is in H727, the minimum sort of threshold for regulation in the field that you have before you. That is 140 gigawatt hours a year. Next over, you have a 60 megawatt data center, which is what the Boston Consulting Group projects to be the average size of a newly constructed data center in 2028. Right now, they pegged that at about 4. So twice, the average is twice the minimum threshold that is in this bill. That's 430 gigawatt hours. The entirety of all of the electric usage in Vermont Electric Co-op territory is almost exactly that same amount, 475 gigawatt hours. So one average data center would be the size of the second largest utility in the state of Vermont. Then you've got the Senate bill S205 at 100 megawatts, so that's sort of in above that threshold. Then you've got the largest data center plan for the state of New York currently, which is a little bit over, right about half of the total electricity usage in the state of Vermont. Oh, forget. I can get that to you. I had it in my head when I prepared this for the house, but it's a power plant.
Is it near Cuba Lake?
That's pretty good. Yeah, so it's named for the coal plant that existed there. I forget the town or city that it's in. I apologize. But I guess that's true.
Yeah.
Lansing, New York.
There you go.
On the shores of Cayuga Lake.
That is literally near where I grew up, my best friend.
Well, they're about to use half the electricity of the state of Vermont.
Wow.
Then you've got the state of Vermont, second from the side. That is retail electric sales, total electricity usage is marginally higher, but essentially the same. And then you've got single campus that Meta, Facebook is planning to build, is going to be building, I think it's in permitting now, in Louisiana. That's one site, which is nearly 3 times the electricity usage of the state of Vermont. And that is not the only data center that large plant in the United States, although it's certainly one of the largest. So
That one is 3 times as much.
not quite 3
Almost,
times as much
okay.
as the entire, all of the electricity used by all users in the entire state. So to be clear, I don't think anyone's expecting one of those to get built here, but this is the sort of like scale that we're talking about. Is like the smallest ones that would be regulated by this bill are about 2% of the total electricity usage in the state of
I
Vermont.
mean, like Lansing is the size of, Shelburne, and it's right on the lake like Shelburne, no, it's right on the lake, which is a small lake, it's not, it's comparable.
In scale, yeah,
In scale,
in terms of
in
the
terms of-
community.
In terms of the community, yeah, I feel like, yeah.
And I will get into, whenever I return, a little bit about this idea of Vermont scale and what we actually expect here, and of course, no one really knows. I think the utilities made some very good, did good modeling and gave you good information yesterday, but there are some ways that data centers have been behaving that could allow them to site a much larger facility here than we might expect, and I can get into what I mean about that. The other thing that is, so the scale's one of the core pillars of how we're thinking about this, the context we're operating in. The other one is how quickly things are changing. So this is a quote from McKinsey, which is a consulting group. 10 years ago, a 30 megawatt facility was considered a large data center. Obviously, as you just heard, it's about half the average that's expected in a couple of years. Now we're talking about 40 megawatts is the average, 60 megawatts is expected to be the average in a couple of years. And about a third of data centers constructed in the United States are expected to be 200 megawatts in a couple of years from now. So who knows, maybe those numbers aren't exactly precisely right, but Boston Consulting Group is a very credible organization, and they were, and so I think we should take these numbers for seriously. And who knows where we go from there, right? I think it's anyone's guess is maybe a little bit strong, but I think the sort of range of the possible is generally considered to be, this is a bubble and we're all going to feel really silly about being worried about it in 5 years because it pops and, you know, there's a stock market crash and these things aren't really built at this scale anymore. It seems relatively unlikely given the amount of capital that these companies have, but that's bandied about. And the other end is, and this is not a precise projection, but like, I don't know, a quarter of the electricity in the United States by 2040, something like that. And so this is just to give you a sense again of this sort of like growth curve that we're seeing. So from 2000 to 2030, I think the actual numbers are through 2023 on this, maybe 2024. This is from EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, which is a major think tank organization funded by the electric utility industry. Again, very credible. And so, you know, we're looking at, I don't know if it's literally an exponential growth curve, but it certainly looks like it could behave similarly to one. And so, and you know, when you look at the scale of individual facilities and how many of them are being built and how much faster they're being built, our approach here really is the precautionary principle, which is in my opinion, a fancy way of saying better safe than sorry. Like, let's assume that we might be wrong about some of the protections we have in place in Vermont and do our best to create redundancy, because we're talking about an industry with valuations starting with a T. These are multi-trillion-dollar companies, which wasn't even a thing that existed 5 or 10 years ago. And so I would much rather be in a position where we have done a little bit more than we probably needed to, and we feel a little silly, than missing something. And especially in this rapidly evolving industry, that has enough money and a tech bro mentality to be creative about the ways they're trying to break systems to get to their goals. And so the kind of things that we'll be asking for in this committee are in that kind of vein mostly. The House approached this, they repeatedly said, looking for gap filling. And I think that this bill does that well. I think the state would be better off with this bill than without it. And I would suggest that the Senate approach this with an attitude of how do we create backstops and safeguards and redundancies so that if any of those gaps might not have been entirely filled. The last thing I'll say, and I think I'm right about a time, is we're really the sort of three principles that we're, or three categories that you might say, that we're approaching this with. One, we need to protect from monster repairs and grid, and those are separate and interconnected things. Two, we need to keep climate pollution as low, as close to zero as possible. This industry is kind of eating the progress we've made in the United States on climate alive, and we have an opportunity to.
Unexpected?
Yeah.
Please. Building evacuation, rather than belonging, and evacuate the building. That's it, rather for air, close, there are no.